Okay.
Mm.
All right. Comrades, thank you very much for joining us today. We are honored to welcome Her Excellency, Mrs. Ismara Mercedes Vargas Walter, Ambassador of the Republic of Cuba. Ambassador Vargas Walter is an experienced Cuban diplomat with a distinguished record of service, including roles at the United Nations and as ambassador to the Bahamas. She's arrived in London in early 2024 and has since strengthened political dialogue, cultural exchange, and solidarity between Cuba and the United Kingdom. Her works highlights Cuba's commitment to sovereignty, social justice, and international cooperation. Today, she will share her perspective on the implications of the recent geopolitical developments in the region, as insofar as it affects the Cuban Revolution. We are very, very honored to have you. Just to explain, you have probably been told this before, Your Excellency. Caribbean Labor Solidarity is an organization formed of exiles from Jamaica in and around 1974, although they had met on numerous occasions before. And we're a small organization, but we have a far reach. We have members who attend the meetings regularly from the United States, from Grenada, from Trinidad and Tobago, from Guyana. We had attendees from India, and I understand we have one from Japan. So this is who we are. Our objective is to provide support for progressive movements in the Caribbean and for progressive movements that are of assistance to people of Caribbean descent, wherever they are. So welcome again. A simple question. Would you like to speak now or would you like to speak later, Your Excellency?
As you wish. There is no preference. I am very flexible, and of course, considering the arrangements you've made, I I could follow your instructions in either way,
I,
speaking now or later.
I think my preference would be to have you to speak now. The second speaker is just joining us, Earl Bosquet, a prominent um, global journalist from St. Lucia. And I'm sure that if you wish to have more time, he is noble enough to sacrifice his time to allow you. So can I suggest that you speak now? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And you mentioned that CLS was a small organization. I I have to say that there is no small organization when it comes to solidarity and consistency. The way you work and the way you advocate for justice and the way you support countries like Cuba and friends from the region means a lot. And especially in very difficult times we are going through, we are particularly grateful for your solidarity and for standing with us today. We meet at a moment of extreme danger. The history of our region is being written in fire and coercion. The mask of the US empire has not just slipped, it has been torn off completely. Maybe for those who were kind of naive regarding the real objectives of the US government, now they have made it very clear, not only for us in the region, but for the entire world. We see this in the outrageous action taken against our brothers in Venezuela. The recent kidnapping, and we have to call it what it is, kidnapping of the Venezuelan president by the US government is not just an attack on one man or one nation. It is a declaration that sovereignty means nothing to Washington, when it conflicts with their dominance. If they can kidnap a head of state, they are telling the world that no law protects us. Only our unity protects us. But their aggression does not stop at abduction. It extends to the very lifeline of our economy, energy. I must speak plainly about the latest escalation from the Trump administration. Cuba is facing now a new suffocating offensive. The latest executive order against Cuba is not just a tightening of the already criminal blockade. It is blackmail on a global scale. President Trump has explicitly threatened to impose devastating commercial tariffs on any country that dares to send oil to Cuba. Think of what this means. They are telling the independent sovereign nations of the world, if you help Cuba, keep the lights on. We will destroy your trade. They are trying to starve the Cuban Revolution into submission by cutting off our fuel supply at the source. This is a violation, a serious violation of international law. It is an act of economic warfare designed to inflict suffering on millions of Cuban families. But they underestimate us. They always have, by the way. They do not understand that Cuba is not alone. We will not be intimidated by tariffs. We will not be silenced by kidnappings. We ask you, our friends in the UK, in the Caribbean, in Latin America, from all over the world, to raise your voices.
1 second.
Expose the oil blackmail. Condemn the kidnapping. Defend the Caribbean. We will prevail. Venceremos. Thank you very much.
Ambassador, thank you. Thank you very, very much. I don't know how appropriate it is, but we are aware that a number of your citizens who were members of the armed forces were killed during the kidnapping, the gangsterism of the Trump regime. And I'd like to take this opportunity for everyone here to give a minute's silence in recognition of the sacrifices made by those brave military personnel who faced overwhelming forces, and to their family and to the people of Cuba. So if we could have a minute's silence, please. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Your Excellency. Your
Thank
Excellency,
you.
will you be available to answer questions? I'm sure that a number of people wish to make comments, wish to ask you questions at this rather dangerous but important time. Do you have a few moments to do that? Okay.
Definitely, definitely.
Right. I can't see any questions or any hands up at the minute. Joseph Antoine, go ahead. Joseph Antoine, unmute yourself. Okay, Nadine, could you go ahead?
Yeah, just unmute.
Oh, sorry.
Unmute,
Okay,
unmute.
1 second, Nadine. Joseph,
I
go
was
ahead.
Yeah, it's in relation to the statement. First of all, thank you, Ambassador, for helping us to understand Cuba's position at this point in time. But yesterday, I think on the news of Friday, the president of Mexico said that they were, in effect, that they were not going to be schooled by how to behave with Cuba. So, is Mexico going to help uh, um, Cuba? I mean, I know they have been a long-standing friend of Cuba, and even I heard a piece of news that some time ago that Canada is also intend to help Cuba in terms of the fuel situation. Can you shed any light on that? I hope I'm being clear enough. Thanks.
Yeah, this is in our view the reaction of friends of Cuba, and as you mentioned, Mexico has had a long-standing historic relation with Cuba. And in the face of aggression, in the face of threatening and blackmail, this is the way sovereign nations react. Letting the US government know that even under their threats, under the pressure they are exerting, there is determination to continue supporting Cuba. And especially because of the injustice of the measures adopted by the US. And for more than 60 years, as you very well know, they have imposed a criminal blockade on Cuba. So this recent decision by the US is on the first instance unacceptable, and in my view, whenever people around the world see decisions like this, the reaction is in most of the cases to stick together and to express solidarity for those in need, and especially for the people of Cuba, considering the very nature of the people of Cuba being friendly, hardworking, standing in solidarity with other nations around the globe. And as it was mentioned recently, being in the position to even sacrifice their lives. That's the kind of people we are. And we expect, as President Diaz-Canel mentioned a few hours ago, solidarity from other countries, precisely because of the scope of the decision made by the US with this executive order. The scope of it is very unfair and a matter of concern. Not having the ability of getting oil for a small island nation like Cuba may lead us in a few days to a humanitarian crisis. So our friends know that. They know that. But our friends know that, and that's why those expressions of solidarity coming from governments and from non-governmental organizations, religious leaders, and many others from different parts of the world have been and will continue to be in place supporting Cuba. So we are very grateful for those expressions, and especially for the courage shown by those countries, by those leaders opposing the decision made by President Trump through the executive order.
Thank you, Ambassador. Before I go on to Nadine Finch and then Luke Daniels, I would just like to remind the meeting that the role played by the Cuban people in blood in the Battle of Cuito Cunovale, fought between the 14th of August, 1987 and March 1988, in which the apartheid system was smashed and the mistaken rule of white superiority was crushed, would not have happened were it not for the contribution of, amongst other people, the Cuban people. So if you can please take that back, Your Excellency. Nadine, would you like to go ahead, please?
Yeah, Your Excellency, thanks very much for talking to us at such a difficult time for you. I first met Cuban workers during the Grenada Revolution, and I've visited Cuba 3 times in the past and was always really impressed, particularly by the health system. Can I ask you just 2 very brief questions? Obviously, in the UK, we haven't got a government that's known for its independent thinking. But I don't know whether there's things we can do here to pressurize our government, at least to discuss things with you, and what we can do through the trade union movements and how effective trade union voices from here would be in your support.
Those are amazing questions/comments. Actually, the support for Cuba in the UK is very broadly in several sectors of the British society. And the trade union sector in particular is one of those who leads the way when it comes to the solidarity with Cuba. You know very well the tremendous work, the amazing work carried out by the Cuba Solidarity Campaign, and one of the main friends, allies of the Cuba Solidarity Campaign are precisely trade unions. We have received the support to the situation in Cuba and the condemnation for the U.S. decisions from the main trade unions in the UK. And very recently, the Cuba Solidarity Campaign launched a urgent call, precisely in the wake of the threats expressed by U.S. President and the Secretary of State Marco Rubio against Cuba, and threatening to block any vessel who was coming to Cuba bringing oil, things like those, and threatening to attack Cuba. So that urgent call was signed immediately by leaders from trade unions, including the TUC. I also have to say that there is a nuclear group in Parliament. We have also received several statements from MPs from different parties in the UK, but there is an APPG, an all parties parliament group on Cuba in Westminster, and they have also expressed solidarity, and in a clear fashion, they have also requested the UK government to express their position and to oppose the US when it comes to an aggression on Cuba, and to take into consideration the relationship that Cuba and the UK has had for more than 120 years now. So those are important voices in the UK society. They are taken into consideration, and those are voices who are also liaising with the UK government to let the government know their long-standing position, their firm position, supporting Cuba and condemning any possibility or any attempt by the US to commit an aggression on Cuba or to tighten the already existing regulations on the blockade, which, as you know, are genocidal.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador. Luke,
Yeah, thanks.
we'll have you next, and then followed by Stephen Howard.
Okay, I should start by saying thank you to the ambassador for saying those kind words about Caribbean labor solidarity. My first contact in some ways with...
Well-deserved kind words.
Thank you. And my first contact in some ways with Cuba was when Fidel Castro came to Guyana. I remember soon after the revolution, and there was attempts to isolate the Fidel Castro, and he was invited to Guyana. I was an apprentice in the bauxite industry, and Fidel appeared there, and he was thronged by the workers. Everybody wanted to get close in a great welcome. We were reminded of that, and I think we were also in some way involved with the transport of military to Angola in that when there was a resistance happening down there. So Guyana was involved on several occasions. Unfortunately, we're not seeing the Caribbean leaders stand up in the same kind of way at the moment. And we know partially because the way they're being threatened by this thuggery that's coming from the United States. We suspect many of them are getting calls that they can't refuse, as the mafia likes to tell people. It will make them an offer they can't refuse. And we know that is probably happening behind the scenes. But I want you to know that for most Caribbean people, they support Cuba, support Cubans, and we are appalled by what is happening in the region. And it's a shame we don't have enough mobility on the seas to put a flotilla coming towards Cuba with oil and with all the things that you need. Maybe something like that can be organized, as was happened with Palestine when the genocidal regime in Israel started attacking the Gazan people. Yeah, so we need solidarity in the region. We're very clear that what is under threat here is sovereignty, and we're prepared to fight forever on this issue. We will keep fighting for Cuba, because when we fight for Cuba, we're fighting for ourselves. They're clearly sending a message that what happens in Venezuela can happen anywhere else, to any one of us, at any point, at any time. And that should not be allowed. We rarely criticize the West in the way they responded to that attack, and especially our government in the UK, where this human rights lawyer was actually waiting for more evidence before he could condemn such criminal activity. And then we see most European countries remain silent on that attack. But as soon as Greenland was attacked, they suddenly realized that the old fabled words that we hear, you know, first they came for the trade unionists, they came for the communists, and then soon they'll be coming for the next person they don't like. And thankfully, they've woken up in some way, and we'll appreciate the response now of not only of the Europeans, but almost the whole world, really, in dealing with Trump now. I think people, the scales are beginning to fall away from the eyes, and people are beginning to see Trump for what he is, a bully. And we see more action in the US, people resisting. And I wondered if maybe that's a question I can ask you. Does it give you any hope that things might change in terms of what we're seeing happen in the US with the Democrats finally seeming to wake up to resist the criminal activity of the president and the people on the streets? Does that give you any hope about any change? Thank you.
Well, actually, it's a very fluid situation in the US, as you mentioned. And Cuba has, I have to say, many friends in the United States. People from the working class, religious leaders, former military even, people in Congress, many members of Congress oppose the current policy. And not only Democrats, there are Republicans also opposing this policy because it's totally inconsistent with the way countries should relate to each other. And of course, there may have differences between us as countries, political differences, but that in no way justify the attempt to exterminate a whole population. And that has been the case of the US government. And we have to say, subsequent US governments, both Republicans and Democrats, their main goal has been, since 1959, the overthrow of government in Cuba, destroying the revolution, no matter how important the revolution has been in terms of the achievements and the improvement, significant improvement of the quality of life and the dignity of the Cuban people. No matter how important has been the cooperation between Cuba and the rest of the region, especially, of course, the Caribbean, which is our natural environment. But this is a situation we have to say that it's beyond whatever may imagine. I remember a few months ago, we had a meeting with some friends, and they said, but there is nothing else they could do against you. They already have the most comprehensive blockade in history, the most long-lasting blockade. And I remember replying humbly, there is still some room for them to make decisions and to adopt measures against Cuba. And this is what is happening now. So for us, it's very important the position of members of the U.S. Congress. For us, it's very important. Every single friend of Cuba around the globe liaising with their counterparts in the U.S. and expressing opposition, expressing indignation for what is going on, and for the way they are trying to impose their will in Cuba, and for the threat that these measures represent in terms of the survival of a whole population. This is much more than a political standpoint, which we all agree. We all oppose the imposition of unilateral coercive measures and the imposition of the blockade against Cuba for more than 60 years now. But this is much more. Now we are talking about a humanitarian component. And this is the reason why we continue to have the firm position that the US is not mandated to do what they are doing to Cuba and in other countries around the world. There is no way we accept those rules because we are a sovereign nation and we are determined to continue exercising our sovereignty in our internal policy and our external policy. But any action, any support that you can give to Cuba will be more than welcomed. It will be a confirmation of the long-standing friendship for Cuba, and at the same time, it's an expression of the defense of the sovereignty of every single nation around the world, and especially in the region. We are all small islands. So what they are doing to Cuba today, they could do it to any other country in the region tomorrow. If they consider that what they are doing is acceptable, then they will continue moving forward. And history has taught us that they won't stop. So silence is not an option. Again, this is not about Cuba. This is about collective security in the region.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Stephen, if you allow me, please, I'd like to ask Steve Cushion to say what can be done, particularly in what he's just posted on the chat from Cuba Solidarity Campaign. Steve, if you can go ahead.
Yes, you can probably see on the screen from the Cuba Solidarity Campaign's website. I've put the link to this open letter, as it were, in the chat. I will also, when we circulate the video of this, I'll circulate it there. It's not much, but it is the very least we can do is to sign this this open letter that the Cuba Solidarity Campaign have started. It surprisingly, apparently, it has 29,000 signatures already. So I think that at the very least we can do is that. We must all think of other things we can do. We can raise the matter within our trade unions, within our whatever other organizations we might be involved with. There will be, I hope, in the not too distant future, a demonstration somewhere in support of Cuba. Although there's, at the present moment, there is so much that we are demonstrating about, but I think that we have to. We will take the lead for the Cuba Solidarity Campaign on this. But when they do call an action, rest assured, Caribbean Labour Solidarity will support. But at the very least, it takes 2 seconds. Sign this open letter. You'll find the link in the chat, and I'll circulate it later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve. Stephen Howard, over to you, please. If you'd unmute yourself.
Yes. Thank you, Brother Chair. Ambassador, muchas gracias por la excelente presentaciones. My Spanish is bad, but I just want to say thank you. First, thank you is as a person who is of African descent, African heritage, because of the fantastic role that Cuba has played in the liberation of the African nations, especially in the southern part of Africa. Also, as a Caribbean person, thank you for your excellent, for Cuba's excellent role in making sure that they could do whatever it is that they could do to support the Caribbean. Particularly as someone from Trinidad and Tobago, I really would like to say thank you to the Cuban people for coming down to Trinidad and Tobago, especially during COVID, sending down your medical expertise down there to help us when COVID was going on. Thank you for the relationship that exists between Trinidad and Tobago and Cuba. And seeing that I'm here in the US, there are a lot of demonstrations going on about this, what the actions of this present administration, demonstrations with thousands of people Sometimes the temperature is -0 degrees Fahrenheit and below, but yet people are out there day and night letting folks know that they don't agree with the actions of this administration. But I have one question, Ambassador. Seeing the philosophy of the Secretary of State for the U.S. when it comes to especially Cuba and Venezuela, do you think that that's one of the reasons why he was put into that role as Secretary of State, along with the other titles that he has, that he was put in a position whereby he could be the one to basically accomplish this administration's goal when it comes to Cuba and Venezuela and even and Mexico? Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Stephen.
Well, thank you, Stephen. It's difficult to say. When we go back to the previous elections in the U.S., and you know the current Secretary of State has been more than one, not a candidate, but one of the big group aspiring to the U.S. presidency, and there is definitely let's say a feature on Marco Rubio, the current Secretary of State of the U.S. As you mentioned, his obsession. You said philosophy, and it's, let's say, very refined saying philosophy, but it is indeed his obsession for Cuba and Venezuela has been his feature, politically speaking, and his work in the Senate also reflected that obsession. If you ask me if that was the main reason, I may say I don't doubt it, but I cannot confirm it neither. But the reality is that he has not been acting as a real Secretary of State who is supposed to foster diplomatic relations and who is supposed to foster a balanced foreign policy for the U.S. It's on the contrary, he has been encouraging the current president and other members of the executive to have a more confrontational position on Cuba, Venezuela, and other countries. So again, it's difficult to say, but what I can say is that even before his current position as Secretary of State, as a senator, Marco Rubio, along with Mauricio Claver Caron and former Senator Bob Menendez, they were the architects of the tightening of the U.S. blockade and the policy in general against Cuba during the first mandate of President Trump. So their history together against Cuba dates back to those days. It has not started a few months ago. And the main reason why this has been happening is, again, because of his obsession against Cuba, a country which he has not visited. He's Cuban descent. He claims his parents had to leave Cuba, and indeed they left Cuba, but before the Cuban Revolution. They fled Cuba, escaping from Batista, the dictator at the time. So that was before January the 1st, 1959. And that is something that he always tries and explode. I'm Cuban descent. My parents had to run away from Cuba, but he always forget to say when and why they left, they fled, and it was again before the revolution. So this is another example of the kind of policy that is being carried out in the US, the unbalanced nature, to be diplomatic, the unbalanced nature of the US politicians, and the fact that there is no clarity by the US president on the assessment and the advice he's being given regarding Cuba. He's being advised by somebody who has never been to Cuba, who has no contact with Cuban authorities. So what can we expect?
Okay, thank you, Ambassador. Can I make a suggestion to everyone in the meeting that in addition to signing the letter of support from Cuba Solidarity Campaign, that we go away and make an effort through our religious places, our trade unions, and everywhere else to bring about pressure on the United States government against the actions and sanctions, what the Cubans themselves refer to as a siege of this island. I will make this known to you, Ambassador, that about 50 years ago, Cuba came out of the first part of its siege with the advent of the Grenada Revolution. And whilst a number of us have mentioned earlier in our talk, in this talk, about the sacrifices made by the Cuban military, what is even as important, if not more important, is the lives saved by the Cuban medical brigades across the world, stretching from Ethiopia to Grenada, to Nicaragua, to Venezuela. And I see from one of our comrades, who I think is in Trinidad, from Nalia Todd, the people of Trinidad and Tobago are grateful to Cuba for the help so generously given to us in the delivery of healthcare. What country is this Cuba? A poor country, a country that has been subjected to more than 60 years of siege, nevertheless has the capacity to give to the world's poorest. This is fantastic, and we must support it. When we compare and contrast that the United States has withdrawn from the World Health Organization, the country that claims to be the richest in the world, withdrawing from an international health organization, yet here is Cuba providing health to its poorest sisters and brothers. I understand that our next speaker will be saying issues about what the American government are doing to the smaller Caribbean countries. But in the meantime, Your Excellency, do you want to remain with us, or do you have anything else to say?
Thank you so much. I just wanted to touch upon two aspects very briefly. One is related to the urgent call, which I already mentioned, earlier, and I'm very grateful that it's been shared for all the participants to be signed. This urgent call, as I explained before, was already signed by the main trade unions in the UK, their leadership, also members of parliaments, and it's very important because the number reflects not only the variety of actors of the British society as we speak, but also friends from other countries. So this call has received the support of people from abroad, the UK. And it's an amazing initiative, a very timely initiative by the Cuba Solidarity Campaign, which, as I said at the beginning of the presentation, their outstanding work for Cuba, for raising awareness and to explain the real policy against Cuba by the US and the need for solidarity coming from the UK. It's something that we not only respect, but also have as an example of what could be done in many countries that have friends of Cuba as well. So this is something that we will continue sharing, and the number has raised very quickly. And as you mentioned, it has a lot to do with the role of Cuba and the kind of people and the respectful relationship that Cuba has had with every single nation since the very first hours of the revolution. So we have never invaded any country, we have never threatened any country. All we do is extending our hand in order to support if needed. And of course, always respecting the sovereignty and the kind of people that we find everywhere else. That's one thing. And the other one has to do with the historic moment we are living. These are very tough times for Cuba, for the region, and for many other countries. But in the case of Cuba, it has a particular significance. We are, as we speak, celebrating the 100th anniversary, the centennial anniversary of Fidel Castro. And there is no way we speak about the Cuban Revolution. There is no way we speak about the Cuban achievements. There is no way we speak about the role of Cuba, the solidarity extended by Cuba, the example that Cuba represents in the region and internationally, if we do not speak about Fidel Castro. So these are very tough times, but we continue to be guided and we continue to be encouraged by Fidel, by his legacy, by his work, and we continue to make sure that we know and we act as if each one of us is Fidel. So Fidel will not die on the year of his centenary, of his centennial. His example, his legacy, his hard work will continue guiding the Cuban Revolution. And of course, since we are all involved in this effort, we know our friends will also stand by our side in this year of celebration. And celebration does not necessarily mean parties. Celebration means consistency. Celebration means working hard and moving forward to defend the sovereignty of Cuba and the rest of the countries of the region. So those are two notes I wanted to raise, and of course I will be more than honored to stay with you and to continue listening and sharing thoughts with the rest of the participants in this very important meeting.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Before we go on to our next speaker, I would like everyone to give a big hand to Her Excellency. Thank you so much for giving us time, and do pass on to your government and to your people the support that you have got and the people of Cuba have got from the British people, even though the support from the British political establishment may not be as forthcoming. That will change. Before we move on to our next speaker, Brother Earl Bosquet, a prominent world journalist resident in the Caribbean, who will talk about the efforts of the Trump regime to dump people that they're expelling from the United States into the smaller Caribbean countries. I see that we've got a contribution in the chat from Paul Ward and from Nzinga Asata. I wonder if either of you would like to say briefly what is the background to these comments. So, for example, Paul, if you can, if you're willing to speak, can you say what it was that led Prime Minister Holness in 2018 to call for a lifting of sanctions against Cuba? The PM Holness is the Jamaican Prime Minister, and Jamaica had been a major recipient of aid and assistance in all spheres from the Cuban government. Paul, are you able to say briefly? And Nzinga, if you could please get ready.
Give me a couple of minutes, I'll read the article that I sent the headline of. I can't quite recall. Just give me a few minutes. Thank you.
Okay.
Well, mine will be brief. I actually returned, I came here when I was 7 in England, and I returned to Jamaica in 1998 to 2003 and was living there. And Castro had been invited by the government, and he was doing a tour of different parts of Jamaica, because he also spoke in Montego Bay. But I can remember the speech at the Nelson Mandela Park in Halfway Tree, Kingston, and it was described as a marathon of Castro highlighting the support that had been given across the Caribbean, but specifically, I know a lot of support was given to Jamaica in terms of healthcare. I can remember even light bulbs being given to Jamaica. So there's a lot of gratitude for the support that Cuba has given to Jamaica. And we all know of the support that was given to Michael Manley at that time. So I just thought I'd mention that because it was described as a marathon, which was a phenomenal presentation.
Okay, thank you, Nzinga. Paul, if you are not able to speak, I'll ask Earl to speak, and then maybe you can contribute later.
Ask Earl first. Yeah, sure.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Repeat, I'm having a bit of problem here.
Yeah, sure. Ask Earl to speak. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Earl, if you could unmute yourself. I can see that you're on the beach. You've probably got a pina colada in your hands. But to be serious, things seem to be happening at speed in the Eastern Caribbean at the behest of the Trump administration. Could you please introduce yourself and tell us what's going on?
Okay, I'm Earl Bosquet. I have a very long relationship with Cuba, not only as a journalist, but also as one whose political development and understanding of how the world turns and how the winds blow in the Caribbean, a lot of it had to do with my association with and role in offering solidarity to Cuba. I first visited Cuba in 1978 for the 11th World Festival of Youth and Students. And before that, for more than a year, was vice president of the National Preparatory Committee for that 11th World Festival. And that festival took place from August July 26 to August 5th in 1978, and the hundreds of us from the Caribbean who were in Cuba for that festival, I would dare to say that it has helped shape us into who we are today, one way or another. And it is against that background that I'm able to indicate that from that experience in the case of St. Lucia, those of us who were part of the festival delegation from St. Lucia, there were 5 of us, we were able to continue to make contributions at the political level and also at the government level, because there was a regime change in St. Lucia less than a year later, or just about a year later, on July 2nd in 1979. That was just after the Grenada Revolution. And of course, solidarity with Cuba was quite prominent in the period between 1979 and 1983, when there was another unfortunate period of change in St. Lucia like there was in Grenada. I was also associated with the negotiation of the very first scholarships from Cuba for St. Lucian students, and that was as a result also of the 1978 conference. And I say so because what I will be speaking about has to do very much with scholarships from Cuba to St. Lucia and the rest of the Caribbean, if the current Secretary of State and advisor on U.S. national security has his way, we will no longer be getting scholarships, or we will no longer be able to accept the scholarships that Cuba will continue to offer. In the period between 1983 and now, Cuba has maintained its solidarity with the Eastern Caribbean. And I'm speaking here of the CARICOM and OECS member states, which comprise 14 countries stretching from Jamaica in the north to Guyana and Trinidad and Suriname in the south. And all have constructive relationships with Cuba over the years in terms of the Cuba-CARICOM agreements, but also the bilateral agreements that have mainly been featured through medical and health cooperation to all of the countries. And that has been coming in the case of St. Lucia for the past 44 years since we established diplomatic relations with Cuba. And of course, by way of background to something somebody said earlier, we need to put Cuba's treatment of and relationship with the Eastern Caribbean within the context of one development, one strategic dynamic development that took place in 1972, a year before CARICOM was established. And 1972 was the year when the 4 independent Caribbean, English-speaking Caribbean nations, Jamaica, Barbados, Guyana, and Trinidad and Tobago, did something countries had not done before in the region and outside. And that was they came together as one and recognized Cuba. And by so doing, the Caribbean, before CARICOM, those 4 countries had effectively broken the US blockade of Cuba. And as a result of that, I would dare to say that what we are going through now under all successive administrations is part of the reasoning that we have never been forgiven for that. So what we have today is a situation where thousands, hundreds of thousands of Caribbean citizens have benefited from the Milagro, Operation Milagro, the Miracle Eye Project. They have also been, in the case of St. Lucia, close to 1,000 graduates from the University of Havana on free scholarships over the past 40 years. There have also been in St. Lucia over those past 40 years a consistent presence of Cuban doctors and nurses providing international support and today actually being employed by way of the roles that they play in the health system in St. Lucia. We have also the relationships that continue to develop insofar as Cuba's assistance in the health sector, although in other areas as well, but for the purposes of this discussion, in health and education. Well, all of that is about to come to an end unless there is some miraculous saving initiative, maybe as a result of the global solidarity that we are building. If there are already 29,000 persons in Britain who have signed this petition and do not yet know of the fact that today the United States government has read the Riot Act to at least 7 Eastern Caribbean governments, the 6 in the OECS, Antigua and Barbuda, St. Kitts, Grenada, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and also we have seen, and St. Lucia, of course, and also that Riot Act has been read to Belize, where we have all been not asked to, but told by the United States that we cannot, we meaning the governments and people of St. Lucia and those countries, can no longer do 2 things. One, accept scholarships for health education at the University of Havana, and secondly, that we have to end all health cooperation with Cuba and return all of the Cuban collaborators in not only St. Lucia, but all of those countries. I would also dare say that there are reasons why the other countries in CARICOM have not been read the Riot Act. Trinidad, for obvious reasons. Guyana, because it has already agreed and publicly agreed to host the persons to be deported who the United States have rejected their applications for asylum. All of those countries have been put under simultaneous pressure to end those programs of cooperation with Cuba, which were first indicated when Marco Rubio, as Secretary of State, visited the region and held summit meetings, first in Jamaica, then in Trinidad, and then traveled to Guyana to speak to Guyana and Suriname. Back then, the region indicated collectively that we needed the Cuban assistance, that we rejected the allegation that the Cubans assisting us in the Caribbean are doing so as a result of forced labor. We rejected the assertion that we were encouraging Cuba to exploit its trained personnel in order to fatten the pockets of the Cuban leadership. Those sort of stories are so ridiculous that they are not listened to. And that is why, as indicated, the world has revolted against the cutting off of the oil the embargo, the oil embargo across Cuba, a country which, as the ambassador, the speaker earlier reminded us, a country that already has the most sanctions in the world. Venezuela has over 1,000 sanctions. Cuba has by far much more. And those sanctions have gone back for 63 years way back to 1962, when Cuba designated and said that it was embarking the revolution would be socialist. So Cuba has been punished for 63 years for embarking on its selected political path of development. And 63 years later, what we have is a United States that has now decided to punish Eastern Caribbean governments by saying to them, you have to stop the most important aspect of cooperation between yourselves and Cuba, failing which we will do a number of things. One, that is, the United States is going to make entry into the United States difficult, if not impossible, by shifting the goalposts in terms of requirements for entry. That is already the case in St. Lucia and the other OECS territories, where the United States has put a pause on applications for green cards. And those applications for green cards are not affecting people who just want to go to the United States. They're affecting Caribbean people in the United States itself. And we have to be able to understand that while that strategy, general strategy under the new Donroe doctrine that has replaced the Monroe doctrine, that dual strategy is hitting the Caribbean as well as Caribbean people in the US. It is also hitting Caribbean people from these countries who want to travel to Europe, because the European Union and the US are working together to rearrange the entry situations to the situation where now countries that have what we call citizenship by investment programs, again, the same 6 OECS member states, have also been targeted by the European Union, that has outlawed those CBI programs, which are important to the economies of those countries, which will now no longer be getting US aid and have not been getting much US aid since the Grenada Revolution at any rate. So we need to be able to understand, folks, is that the current strategy against Cuba is multifarious. It is naval, it is economic, it is diplomatic, it is political. It features the same sort of psychological warfare propaganda that was used against Grenada and has been used and is still being used against Venezuela. And I will stop here to give our audience the chance to ask questions. But thank you so very much. If we have time, I'd like to say a few things about the historicity of Caribbean labor solidarity and my old friend, the late Billy Strawn, and also to explain why I think that the current president of Venezuela, the current acting president of Venezuela, has had to take positions that even herself would not have dreamed of wanting to have taken even on the first day of this year. Thanks anyway for how far we've got.
Okay, thank you.
Just one small thing about solidarity. I was inspired by the 29,000 signatures in the UK, and I wanted to make some suggestions as to how this can be fought back, this campaign against Cuba can be fought back in the Caribbean countries affected, but also by way of solidarity abroad. And I think these are the following sectors that can be approached by way of the solidarity we are seeking. And like I said earlier, the almost 1,000 students, if not more, students and youth who visited Cuba in 1978, the 11th World Festival Youth and Students, they are all still here, most, and we would be surprised to know what positions they hold in the region, from high court judges to prime ministers and other areas like that. We also need to look at the people who and entities who are members of the national preparatory committees. We are all elders now, but we are the ones who sparked the flame. We also need to get to the thousands of graduates in the Caribbean who qualified from the Cuban University of Havana and who, unfortunately, the most of them have returned home simply to join the system and have not been sufficiently active in showing solidarity. This is a time to call those of them who fit that description out to help us hit the streets. We also need to look at the patients in all of our territories who survived as a result of going to Cuba at the last moments when they were failed in their respective countries, and who have given Cuba the credit for having saved their lives. We have to look at the hundreds of thousands of Caribbean and Latin American persons who benefited from the Milagro Eye project. That was the dream and reality of Fidel Castro and Hugo Chavez, that saw thousands of Caribbean persons travel to Cuba for eye care, but which program continues in St. Lucia and other countries through the eye care programs being carried out by Cubans. The people of Cuban descent in the Eastern Caribbean also need to be approached. We also need to approach those Cuban migrants who, although they might have political problems with the Cuban Revolution, they too, however, would not like to see Cuba become another or return to being the American colony that it was. And finally, Cubans who will be affected by the current effort to close those programs. They are still in the respective countries, and we need to have them all out. Sorry about that, Kobena. Let's go.
Well, I take your apology on behalf of the meeting and on behalf of Caribbean Labour Solidarity. However, Mr. Earl Bosquet, world journalist though you are, you cannot escape so easily, because there is quite a more that you have to say in respect, particularly of the dumping of people from the United States to the Caribbean countries and what that means for those Caribbean countries. We've got three people ready to ask you questions on your first part, but don't forget you've got a second part. Now, what you're saying that, and I saw the report this morning, that these 7 countries of the Eastern Caribbean and Central America, Belize, they are not to accept health scholarships for their own people provided by Cuba. I presume that America is not providing replacement scholarships. Secondly, the return of Cuban health collaborators back to Cuba, in fact, their expulsion. I presume that USAID or a similar organization, well, I don't think USAID exists now, USAID or a similar organization is going to fill the gap. And even if they did, what cheek? I mean, are we to say that the foreign departments of these governments is now to be found in the State Department in Washington? Are we back in the days of British rule, this time with the Americans? We are independent countries, for goodness sake. My final bit is this. During the revolution, the American government sanctioned the Grenada government heavily, and we had to turn inwards. And with the support of certain countries, particularly Cuba, and countries in the East, like the Soviet Union and East Germany and so on, we managed to persevere. But we persevered because the people of Grenada said, up yours, we're not having it. We're going to do our thing. Unfortunately, it appears that our current leaders are supine, ready to twist and turn. I think, to use that phrase, that the sun is always shining, we will get into a new period of sunshine. Enough of my pontificating. Joseph Antoine, if you unmute yourself, followed by Luke, and then followed by Mr. Gifalka, Glenroy. Joseph, unmute yourself, please. Okay, we'll come back to Joseph. Luke, if you're ready to unmute yourself.
There's something about unmuting. We're trying to unmute it, not unmuting. But anyway, thank you, Earl. I mean, we worked together during the revolution, so I know you from a long time ago. And so thank you for the information and helping to bring more clarity for us. The question I have, though, is, notwithstanding the bold move of the full prime minister, as you mentioned, in defying any repercussion in 1972, and also the stance that CARICOM made during the first set of attack on on Venezuela, you have a situation now where the various island governments have been playing games, either stalling or giving excuse and so on. And it turns out that these countries are in bed with the US. In terms of the journalistic responsibility of Caribbean journalists and media centers, would you say that the media in the Caribbean generally have failed us in helping to put things in perspective and help to stir the conversation in a direction that would help our people to take a more decisive stand when it comes to the attack, first of all, on Venezuela and now on Cuba? Thank you so much.
Should I respond now?
Yes, please.
Yeah, okay. I think we have to be careful about two things. Overlooking humanism and the propensity to switch and apply periods of history according to our dreams and desires. In terms of the second one, it is unfair to compare any one set of leaders of CARICOM with another previous set of leaders of CARICOM. If that was possible, but it isn't, because we are dealing with individuals, a collective of individuals driven by human motives. We cannot remove the human aspect from our political leaders. And therefore, those who existed at one point in time during the Grenada Revolution and who stood up to and resisted any external interference in Grenada was because at the time the British were not in support of that, because of the way in which the invasion took place in a situation where, in my view, the revolution had already committed suicide. It is in that context, I would say, that we have to put ourselves sometimes in the place of the leaders of our respective countries. And in the case of Grenada, before we got to this issue of the deportees, you had the situation of the request by the United States for putting a radar at the Maurice Bishop International Airport, which everybody knew would be used against Venezuela. The Prime Minister of Grenada was in a bind. If he agreed, he would he would invoke the wrath of Grenada and the Caribbean. If he disagreed, he would invoke the wrath of Donald Trump and Marco Rubio on behalf of the present situation. Remember Admiral Halsey, the guy in charge of the U.S. Southern Command, after visiting Grenada and Antigua, tendered his resignation because he knew what was going to happen and he didn't want to be part of that. Fast forward to today, where another point I'll make is do not like our reference to the persons to be deported and extradited from so-called third countries to third countries. I do not like us to describe them as being dumped, because the term dumped envelopes them with or equates them with garbage. And while I would understand our natural fear that the so-called worst of the worst would end up among those who will land on our shores, I think that we also have to look at the new thinking that is emerging in the Caribbean in these new periods of crises. Before, we simply complained and argued irrespective of how we felt. Today, there is more judgment. The information is more widely available, and therefore people better understand and appreciate the importance that the US and Europe have attached to the skills that they have imported from the global South, from the developing countries of the world over the years. That those skills were imported during colonialism, and after colonialism, they were attracted by the imperial empires and the ease with which they would be able to live and survive. Today, after the so-called immigrants have built up the United States, which was stolen from its original people, those immigrants, and we all know the United States and Canada are countries built by immigrants. The United States, built by immigrants, is now closing off the door on immigrants. And with almost everybody that we know in CARICOM, knowing somebody who has a relative in the United States, the importance attached to a US visa is so great that we tend to underestimate the value people attach to that. And therefore, the United States, knowing the value that Caribbean people have attached to visas to the United States and also to entry to Europe, have decided to leverage those factors and are now saying what they are saying to the CARICOM countries. And forget, this is not about cutting ties with Cuba. This is about them sending to our shores the people who they have decided they do not want. And therefore, what we have to start doing is what there was an international conference, medical conference on racism and minority the factors that ended in St. Lucia yesterday. And it was at that conference that the Prime Minister, it was mainly people of African descent from Europe and the United States and the Caribbean who attended that week-long conference. And that was where he disclosed for the first time that the United States had said to the St. Lucia government that this is what must be done. Now, they did give a sort of, sorry about that, they did give a sort of response to that in terms of the Black Alliance in the United States had decided that they, and I like the phrase the chairman gave. He said, when you are served lemons, you make lemonade. But I think the amount of lemons we need to make the lemonade is that Cuba has made available free over 40 years. That is going to take another decade to develop. And my last point on this is that this is another occasion when Caribbean unity, whatever is left of it, has to be demonstrated, and it can start within the OECS. It could start within the OECS, where Grenada, all hats off to Grenada, has issued a response to the demand, not the request, the demand by the US. And that response has three elements. One, it says that what is being discussed is a memorandum of understanding. There is no agreement, and therefore the legal status of what is being discussed is that there is nothing that has been agreed upon. And the media has been unable to distinguish between a memorandum of understanding and an agreement. Guyana, I believe, subject to correction, is the only country that has signed an agreement. And I would like to recommend that the OECS examines Grenada's response. The second one, it says, is that Grenada will have to have the right to process the persons who are coming in and to ensure that none have criminal records and have the right to reject in the same way that it is being demanded that they accept. And the third element has to do, very importantly, with who's going to pay. And Grenada is saying that the United States, if the agreement comes around, will have to pay every cent for relocation of those deportees, their passages, their housing, and their sustenance while in Grenada. And it is in that context that, like I said, I'd like to suggest that the OECS adopt that. And I think this is another issue where the paucity on training of media workers and journalists in the Caribbean is manifesting itself today, because the effect of the phenomenal changes in journalism and information technology today has been to provide so much distraction on a daily basis that media people are chasing headlines across the world and not necessarily within the Caribbean. And therefore, while we tend to follow CNN, BBC, and the multinational media and carry their arguments into what is happening in CARICOM, unfortunately, we have those Caribbean media people who are saying, well, in the interest of fairness, let's look at it on the other hand, that there have in fact been many Caribbean people who have been taking advantage of the US welfare system alongside many others. My response to that is that might very well be so, but we cannot punish the majority for the actions of a minority. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Earl. You've got a number of people. I'm starting off with Luke, followed by Glenroy, Roberta, and then Stephen Howard. If I can ask you to just hear what they say and answer as best you can. By the way, yes. I take the critique that you have given on behalf of the group and on behalf of myself. So thank you very much. Luke, when you're ready.
Great, thanks. I wonder if Earl can say something about whether the Caribbean governments would be held complicit with colluding with the Americans dumping. I heard you say you don't like the word dumping, but this is an administration
No, yeah, I understand. I understand.
that talks about our people as, our countries as
As
shithole
garbage.
countries
As
and garbage and stinking and all the rest of it. But more seriously, I do think that if they collude with this and accept, citizens who are being deported from the USA, they are going along with the criminal activity of the US, as many of the lawmakers in the US are beginning to present that case. So that's there. But the other issue for me is about, that people even wanting to go to the US and so desperate to go, and that threat of a visa can stop people from taking action that is resistant to the oppression that is coming down from the US. And we need to examine that. And so I feel political education is important. And although, as I mentioned earlier, the government, definitely Trump will do his usual mafia stuff and call up leaders and governments and threaten them. But the population has to bolster our governments by coming out and showing resistance to these things and opposing them. So although they might be threatened by the American government, they must also have to take into account what the population is doing and saying. So I think political education is something that's been very lacking at the moment in the region. And I wondered what is your position as well about the fight for reparations, because I personally think it gives us the opportunity, one, to educate people about the African history, about their own history in the Caribbean, in a way that we haven't been able to do political education in the region for a while. I don't know what is happening on the ground in the Caribbean, or if nothing of that is happening on the ground. And I'd like to hear from you on that one. Also, I think there's already one of the islands have started to take nurses from Ghana to replace not Barbados, I think another country. But there must maybe more than one country. Not Grenada. I think it was Anguilla or Antigua. One of those have also started to look at having nurses from here in Ghana, where I am at the moment. So that is a question that is there. And we know the US generally are willing to take away things from us, but they never look at replacing. They would say you mustn't have scholarships. Are they going to offer scholarships to people in the Caribbean? I don't think so. Do we want them? Who wants that kind of education under that kind of system? So I think we have some responsibility in the region to start mobilizing the masses, educating the masses politically, and reparations for me is an opportunity for us to do that. So if you can tell me about what's happening in the region around reparations at the moment. Thanks, Earl.
Earl, before you speak, after you've answered Luke's questions, I've got 4 people waiting to give questions. Would you be happy to take all of the questions and then deal with them in one?
Yes, because I'm taking notes, yeah.
Okay, do you want to do that now?
Yes, let's take all the questions now. I see a lot of hands up.
Okay. Glenn Wright, your question, please.
Yes, greetings, comrade. I hear what you said about the memorandum of understanding and not agreement, but they are on the road to agreement. So I hope that people are intending to keep scores about the behavior of governments in the Caribbean and across the globe. Here, where I am on the continent, we need to, the African continent, we need to ensure that the solidarity outreach of the Cuban include the continent. We mustn't forget the sacrifice that Cuban soldiers made in Angola, which led to the situation in Namibia, and obviously South Africa. So there is a role to be played by African nation, and I want to put that to the ambassador if there is effort along that line, if it doesn't break any diplomatic issue. But on the issue of the Caribbean, we need to be very clear that this has been going on for some time. The Jamaican government have been taking in other nationality and other people who do not wish to be deported from the US are not eligible or correctly treated to be deported. And we mustn't forget the Rwanda debacle that the Tory party engaged in. So this idea is not new. What we need is new methods to fight it. So I really just want to ask two guests about the appeal to the African continent and what do we do about leaders that are clearly colluding, whether it's a memorandum of understanding or a written agreement, as Earl has referred to. It's still collaborating with the US. Thank you.
Thank you. Roberta, if you could unmute yourself.
Okay,
Go
thank
ahead.
you very much. My question, I'll ask in a second, but I wanted to mention that there's someone who has joined Zoom who may be able to speak to solidarity work with Cuba in the United States. I have not discussed this with them, so I do not want to mention the name of that person.
Ask them to raise their hand.
I'll send a private message and
Yes.
see if they are available to speak. Brother Earl, I remember you from many, many years ago when the late Samori Marksman was alive, and we worked in solidarity with him here in the United States. So it's good to see you, even though we both have white hair now. My question has to do with what the expectation is on the part of the United States for what would happen to these persons, assuming there are Caribbean countries that agree to this arrangement. The reason I ask that is because those other countries in Latin America and Africa, which have taken in third-party deportees, have imprisoned them. They don't have liberty to walk the streets freely. They don't have liberty to depart from those countries. And I'm wondering, is that also what the United States would expect Caribbean countries to do? Are we now to incarcerate these persons, or is this whole thing just a ploy and a threat and, around visa denials and so forth in order to try and coerce Caribbean countries to look the other way as the U.S. increases its military presence in the region? Thank you.
Thank you. Stephen, again, if you unmute yourself, please.
Yes, thanks again for recognizing me, Brother Chair. Two quick questions. The first one to Brother Bosquet. Could you clarify the permanent resident status in the US? Because my understanding is that even though the new green cards have an expiration date, that does not say that once that date is here, that it does not compromise your permanent residency. And to the ambassador, thanks again for remaining in the meeting. Ambassador, if European nations and what is happening now in the US with colonialization 20,001, if those regime changes and executions of progressive leaders and so forth were instead replaced by the fantastic nation building work which Cuba has embarked upon for how many years now, had they replicated Cuba's nation building, where would this planet be today in terms of political, economic, and cultural development? Thank you for recognizing me, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much for a really good last point. Brother Joseph Antoine, if you unmute yourself, please. Brother Joseph, could you unmute yourself, please? In which case, I'll ask Her Excellency, Ismara Mercedes Vegas Walter, if she could answer that last question, which I think was a bit rhetorical. Ambassador, could you unmute yourself? The question, if you remember, is where would the world be if every country followed the Cuban model?
Now, in terms of numbers, is of course very, very difficult to say, but what we can say for sure is that this is completely in line with something that has been present in the political speech of Cuba, which is that a better world is possible. And of course, it's only possible if we all work together as a team, putting on the table what we have. Cuba has no natural resources. However, thanks to the education, the quality of the education system in Cuba, we have very well trained and skilled human resources, and those are the ones we have and what we offer whenever we collaborate with other countries. Other countries, as you mentioned, are stronger in terms of their financial resources and so on and so forth. However, what I may say that is that in addition that a better world is possible, I may add, it's not only possible, but necessary and achievable. So it's a matter of political will. It's a matter of having a clear notion that whatever is happening in a neighbor country or in a neighbor region affects the whole population of the world. So that commitment to make things better, that commitment to work together, that commitment to respect each other despite the differences should be the one that guide our relationship, political, social, economic relationship with other countries on a daily basis. I fully agree with you. There is much, much more that could have been done if we would have all put our efforts together. But in any case, it's not now for us to regret, but to have this as a principle and as a guideline and start or strengthen our already good relationship and try and move forward. The actions, the initiatives that has been carried out recently in the Global South in terms of collaboration, cooperation between small countries, they speak very highly about the possibilities what we have. And also considering that there are also big economies that are willing to support and to engage in initiatives like those, what we can do is look ahead and try and have that movement, that dynamic put into the needs of the peoples of the world. So I am very grateful that you mentioned those possibilities, because indeed, alone we're nothing. However, if we get together, if we think about what is going on and find ways and means to improve our relationship, to foster better mechanisms, there is much, much more we can achieve. So I thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to take two more questions, then I'll come back to Brother Earl. Joseph Antoine, Joseph, are you able to unmute? And then I'll come to you, Rosemary. Rosemary. Okay, Joseph, go ahead.
Yeah, are you hearing me?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry. The problem is that when I try to unmute, I'm not able to unmute. Anyway, I was going to give some information in terms of which of the countries that have accepted Ghanaian nurses. Yes, Antigua is the other country, maybe with Grenada and Barbados. But I wanted to ask a question, and the question is, today, Cuba is being targeted in terms of us suspending our programs with them. What if tomorrow is China, and we are so, I won't say dependent. There's so much coming via China at the moment, and we know the ultimate aim of the U.S. is to squeeze China and Russia out of the region. What if we accede to that? Would we end up like the Gulf states who acquiesced to the United States, and now they're in difficulty, they're in trouble. They don't know what would happen if there's a war between the U.S. and Iran? Are we going to position ourselves in that kind of situation by trying to acquiesce to the U.S. and then put ourselves in danger in the long run? Thank you.
Thank you. Rosemary?
Yes.
I hope I pronounced your name properly.
Good morning. Yes, Rosemary is fine. I'm speaking to you from the belly of the beast, where our challenges are tremendous. And I'd like to thank the ambassador for her comments. I'm more of a comment and a sharing with you some of the things that we're doing here in the United States as a part of the solidarity movement. Number one, believe it or not, Cuba has given medical scholarships to U.S. students who wanted to study medicine in Cuba. So we now have more than 200 U.S. doctors who are practicing medicine in the United States. This is the highest form of solidarity. We owe so much to Cuba, and right now, it's good to see our brothers and sisters from the Caribbean on this call, because one of the things that we have been doing is linking our struggle here in the United States, particularly with our brothers and sisters, primarily in Belize, where we were able to create a movement, in a sense, to have our young people communicate with our brothers and sisters, particularly in Belize, who have been beneficiaries of the Cuban medical brigades. And this has been a very important project because we're then able to use social media to inform the Caribbean community in the U.S., the significance of the role that Cuba is playing and continues to play. The challenge that we're faced with now, that some of you may have heard, that the United States government is now telling any country that has communicating with Cuba, that's trading oil with Cuba, that tariffs will be attached to those deliveries. And that means now that the idea is to squeeze Cuba to the point that we will have to be able to challenge that. So I encourage our brothers and sisters in the Caribbean and in London, wherever you are, that right now the material aid, humanitarian aid, is very important to get into that country. Cuba needs us now. When Africa called, it was Cuba that answered. So right now, Cuba needs us. And Shay talked about solidarity is not an act of charity. It's our ability to be able to respond because we realize that Cuba is a beacon. Even in this is the last point, even in Trump's edict, what he's saying that it is illegal in a sense that people are when people go to Cuba, they come back and they want to share that experience because Cuba represents something that the global capitalist world does not offer. So they want to block that. They do not want us to know what is going on. And that is why right now Cuba needs us more than ever. It needs our solidarity. And I would encourage, again, our brothers and sisters who can travel to the Caribbean, to Cuba, go now. Because some of you may not know, here in the United States, we cannot freely travel to Cuba. We have to go under these categories: support for the Cuban people, and this limits our ability to for regular folks to travel to Cuba. You have that ability. You have those doctors who can speak out, and we're going to be challenging our doctors who have graduated from ELAM, the Cuban medical school, to speak out right now, because Cuba needs us now more than ever. Thank you so much. And Roberta, thank you for putting me on the spot this morning.
Thank you, Rosemary. Earl, you've got a very difficult task. You've got a few minutes. You've got about 10 minutes to answer these 6 or 7 questions.
Yeah, well, I know
questions and comments.
Yeah, I normally take hours to make my deliveries, but let's see how we get. In terms of the questions, on the question of collusion, collaborating, and those sort of terms, again, like I said, we have to recognize not only the fact that political leaders in our Western Westminster system, they think in 5-year terms. Their primary objective is to win the next election. And unlike situations like Grenada, that came to a revolution through a series of struggles that included murder against persons opposed to Gary, vis-a-vis people who won elections at polls, and some of them not having won by any great majorities. They do not think like us. We do not think like them, and we have to be careful about measuring average politicians with our respective yardsticks. In terms of the question about US visas being a magnet, historically, we have to remember America was sold as a land of opportunity, in the same way that England was sold as a place where you had lily fields, etc., etc. We were made to believe that those were places you could go to and get rich quickly, and therefore be able to assist at home. But that has shown not to be. However, the magnet has to do with the fact that, like I said, almost every Caribbean citizen has a relative in the United States who they would wish to be able to visit on a regular basis, and that is a big magnet. We talked about political education. The political education in the time of the Grenada Revolution was about anti-imperialism. The political education today has advanced to the stage where words like genocide and fascism are being used by heads of government and people looking to be leaders of the so-called developed countries, and therefore we are at a stage now where reparations is now, in a short period of time, in the dozen years since CARICOM launched that initiative, reparations has become the #1 agitational issue globally, because as we speak at this point, the African Union has also adopted CARICOM's reparations strategy, and India has also made an appeal to join the reparations movement for the so-called indentured servants who replaced the enslaved to keep the wheels of fortune turning. On the question of the Ghana option, yes, Barbados, Grenada, and Antigua and Barbuda have been providing access to Ghanaians, and in the case of Barbados, it was long before now. And we have to, yes, we cannot compare, like I said, situations, because what the Ghanaian nurses and doctors bring will not be what the Cuban and doctors and nurses bring insofar as proximity and the Caribbean-ness in which they operate. So it is one that we need to explore, but it should not be it should not be at the expense of Cuba. It is not a matter of an exchange. We have to fight to preserve the status quo, and that is why we have to all respond to the appeal from our friend in the United States to pull people out on the streets. In terms of the expectations of the United States, I don't think the United States cares a hoot about what happens to the people that it is going to send to the Caribbean, Africa, and the 72 different countries that it has identified as sources of the persons that it considers risky. They will be sent to the respective countries. But like in a video I saw in relation to somebody from Sierra Leone, I think, just recently, after 30 years in the United States, was abducted by ICE, repatriated, sent to Ghana, which was one of those third countries, and from where Ghana deported her back to Sierra Leone, and she's now in hiding. What that reminds us is that if and when that deportation agreement comes, the receiving countries will have the options of imprisonment, of deporting them to the countries of origin, or keeping them in the countries, providing they are able to join the workforce and make a contribution to the development of the society, them just being non-nationals. And if they're non-nationals prepared to be in good stead, they will be able to do it. Finally, the question of permanent resident status of Caribbean people in the United States, we have to remember that in as much as the United States continues to insist on taking unilateral measures because of its strength and the size of its army, it is also the sovereign right of every country to determine what its immigration policies are. And in the same way that the European Union and the United States have always shifted the goalposts for immigration, as they are doing right now as we speak, that is something that even those who have so-called permanent residence will have to be afraid of, as indicated in the Sierra Leone case that I mentioned. I think I've touched all of the questions here, hopefully.
Okay, thank you very much, Earl. Just before we close up, it is now 2 minutes to 4. David, if you could unmute yourself, I understand you wish to make an announcement.
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, I think this has been an amazing meeting. Well done, CLS, and the two wonderful speakers. I'm glad to speak while Her Excellency is still here. Two things briefly. I was working in Jamaica in the 1980s, teaching in Ewerton Primary School. And the locals, what had happened, the Siaga government had expelled the Cuban medical people and doctors that had been there in the late 70s. The people spoke so highly of the Cuban medical staff in St. Catherine. That's the first thing. There's another link with Her Excellency. She has, and her colleagues have attended every commemoration that we have of Claudia Jones at Highgate Cemetery. And I thank her very much for that. It's really very, very much appreciated. Just to remind everybody, Friday, the 22nd of February, between 1 o'clock and 2 o'clock, may I say 1 o'clock prompt, there will be our annual, this is our 6th annual commemoration, which has always been supported by CLS from the very beginning. And this year, Frank Murray will be speaking for CLS alongside Pragna Patel, who was the founding member and director of Southall Black Sisters, Gawain Little, General Secretary of the General Federation of Trade Unions, Dr. Claire Holder, former director of Notting Hill Carnival, Rob Griffiths, the former General Secretary of the Communist Party, and Georgina Andrews, General Secretary of the YC Young Communist League. thank you very much for letting me make that announcement, and congratulations again, CLS, for such a wonderful meeting today.
Okay, thank you very much, David. I've managed to secure Laura Miller to do a vote of thanks to our two excellent speakers. And sometimes the word excellent is used as a coverall, not in this case. But before I do, I was reminded that Paul Ward had asked you earlier if you'd wanted to say something on what Holness, Prime Minister of Jamaica, had said. Do you wish to elaborate or?
Thank you, Kubi. No, I actually put something in the chat. It was a UN.
I saw that, yes.
Yeah, that's basically what he said. It was a UN General Assembly meeting. But the reason I put it in, of course, is because more recently he's been very cagey about supporting the Venezuelans and said nothing about Cuba. So, of course, we're all very disappointed. I do have the ear of the leader of the opposition sometimes, so I'm hoping I can push him into saying something, which might in turn push the Prime Minister. But that's wishful thinking.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. Before I go over to Laura, I would just say that I've put in the chat links as to how you can join Caribbean Labour Solidarity if you are not already a member, or how you can donate to Caribbean Labour Solidarity. We'd like you to do both because we're poor and the work is done on a few shoulders and so on. And we're having our annual general meeting in March. You will get details both on our website and by email. Laura, I've spoken enough. Over to you.
Thank you. I, on behalf of the executive of CLS and everybody here, I wanted to thank with great, just being very grateful, Her Excellency and Earl for the absolutely wonderful meeting. I had the honor of, did consider it an honor, of teaching teaching English teachers in Cuba before COVID. I haven't been there 3 or 4 times, and I absolutely loved the students. In fact, I was so, we used to talk about baseball because I'm a great baseball fan. I'm an American, but I live in Britain, so I don't, well, I'm both actually.
Morning in progress.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
I'm a great baseball fan, and they gave me a Cuban baseball with all of their signatures on it, which has a place of great solidarity on my in my living room. This meeting has been absolutely wonderful. It's given me a great deal to think about, and I thought I already thought a lot about before, but it's given me even more to think about, and I've been extremely grateful for all of the wonderful comments that people have made. And I think we all need to, as they say where I come from, put our big girl pants on and try and do as much work as we can. Frankly, what's going on in the States frightens the hell out of me. And I am grateful to Caribbean Labour Solidarity for being a place where I can express this, because you can't always when you're an American. And this meeting has been a great help to me, and I'm sure to others, of showing us exactly the kinds of things we can do, the kinds of things that have been done. And I also have to say that when I was in Cuba, I had the fortunate but unfortunate experience of having to spend 2 days in a hospital, having picked up some kind of bug. And I was incredibly grateful, even as a foreigner, for the wonderful medical help that I was given while I was there. So I'm grateful to Cuba for just being there. And I'm very grateful to the speakers for helping me understand what's going on. Oh, okay. I don't know who that was, but never mind. Thank you, Your Excellency. Thank you, Earl Bosquet. And thank everyone here for being at the meeting and for speaking out so passionately about what's needed to be done from now on.
Thank you, Laura. And I think we can all, again, give a little clap to our two excellent speakers and see you at the next meeting, which I think is the Sunday, the 1st of March. But we'll see before then at Highgate Cemetery and at a variety of events across London. Thank you very much, everybody, and thank you.
Thank you.